When we talk about high-speed rail in the United States, the first question that always tends to come up is cost. The naysayers decry how expensive high-speed rail is, and they use that as an excuse when they talk about why high-speed rail will never happen in the United States to the same degree that it exists in, say, China. But how much, in fact, would it cost to build a high-speed rail system in the United States? The answer might surprise you. For the purposes of this video, I will presume that we want to build as much high-speed rail in the United States as they currently have in China. That comes out to about 26,000 kilometers or so. Now, for a long time, the conventional wisdom was that you could not build an extensive high-speed rail system in a country as big as the United States or China, that you could only build one in a relatively small and compact country such as Japan or a lot of European nations. But China has proved that conventional wisdom wrong. According to the EESI, next to China's incredible amount of rail that they've laid, the next closest nations are Germany, Spain, France, and Japan, all of which have laid only about 3,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. The United States, of course, has basically none. Now, of course, this is even more impressive when one considers that high-speed rail is very new in China, relatively speaking. There was basically no high-speed rail in the country about 15 years ago. The 2008 Olympics really commemorated this huge urbanization push in China over the last couple decades, and the construction of the high-speed rail system was the crown jewel of that push. China is very proud of that system, and rightfully so. Of course, when you bring this up to Americans, a lot of them say that what China is doing could never be replicated in the United States for a variety of factors. There are three major points that are typically brought up. Number one is the lack of political will. Number two is Americans' supposed resistance to central planning. And number three is just flat financial cost. As for the first, lack of political will, I will sadly admit that is mostly true, at least at this juncture in this country. In the newest infrastructure package that the Biden administration is pushing through, there is about $50 billion allocated to rail, not high-speed rail, over the next decade, which is not nothing, and it's certainly better than what has transpired in this country rail-wise over the last couple decades, but it's far from great. America is an extremely car-centric society, has been for a long time, and I don't see how that's going to change in the foreseeable future. But let's set that aside for a second and say that we can transcend that in some way. The supposed love of federalism and disdain for central planning, infrastructure-wise, I don't think that argument necessarily holds up when one considers the biggest post-World War II project in this country, that being the interstate highway system, which was very expensive. It cost about $500 billion in today's money, and yet most people would say that system is worth it, even economically. That its benefits very much outweighed its costs for how it facilitated transportation across the United States. I believe high-speed rail could function similarly. But of course, that brings us to the third question, the cost question. Could a high-speed rail system in the United States be built for a price similar to that of the interstate highway system? And that's a complicated question to answer. People always say that China builds high-speed rail much less expensively than the United States does, and this is true, but the difference is not as great as a lot of people seem to imply it is. Hearing people talk about that, you'd think the cost difference was 10 to 1 or even 50 to 1, when in reality it's closer to like 2.8, 2.7 to 1. Which is still not good, but it's not this huge blockage to the building of a grand high-speed rail system that a lot of people seem to think it is. China's high-speed rail costs about $20 million per kilometer, which is very impressive. In Europe, it's about 30 million, and in, say, California's very troubled and disastrous high-speed rail that they're building there, it's about 56 million per kilometer. Now, of course, part of the reason why they're able to build high-speed rail so cheaply in China is the low labor costs, and another reason is how it costs less money to buy the land there than it does in the United States. Europe also has higher labor costs, and while the land might not be as expensive in Europe, it's certainly more expensive to buy than it is in China, and yet Europe has still been able to build high-speed rail relatively efficiently. I don't think there's any reason to believe that the United States is forever stuck at that 56 million per kilometer mark. One other big reason why China has been able to build high-speed rail so cheaply is that it's easier to pay less when you do something in bulk. When you have a grand standardized process to draw from, the cost of each individual kilometer of high-speed rail goes significantly down. I will link to a report from the World Bank that says something similar as a reason why China is able to build high-speed rail so cheaply, aside from the labor and land costs. I'm not just pulling this out of my head. But let's give the naysayers the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that you could not get that cost down, that you're stuck at 56 million per kilometer forever. Does that necessarily mean you could not build high-speed rail in the United States? Well, no, not necessarily. Even if you couldn't get the cost down, it would take about $1.4 trillion to build 25,000 kilometers of high-speed rail across the United States. Now, that is a lot of money, but it's not necessarily a ludicrous amount. For instance, we spent about $2 trillion on the utterly failed and disastrous Afghanistan mire over the last 20 years in the United States. If you can spend that kind of money on war and destruction, I don't see why you couldn't spend that kind of money actually giving the United States a state-of-the-art rail system. It's pretty expensive, but I think it would be worth it. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, I'm happy. If you have any topics you'd like to suggest, please write them down in the comments below. And I really hope this video clears up a lot of misconceptions that people have about high-speed rail. When the cost variable comes up, people always use that as a cudgel to knock down the possibility of high-speed rail in the United States. But while it would be expensive, especially if you can't get that 56 million per kilometer cost down, it's not entirely absurd. But of course, this would have to be done on a large-scale federal level and not on a more localized, piecemeal level like California is trying to do it. But anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It'll be coming in about a week or so. Thank you all again. Adios.